All right, so let's learn about grid. Grid is a way that we can set up a layout for our website. We can do it easily. We can use a lot of stuff that you guys have been learning. Grid is very similar to Flexbox, but it works on using rows and columns. So I'll orient you to my code pen, and I'll place the link to this in the YouTube video. But what we need to see is that we have this, and I'm just using divs. The video after this would be using actual semantic elements. So you can easily see how this is created. Now I have a div that I have a class applied to that's called container. I don't need to use the class, but I just want you guys to be able to see it. Okay, the div that is holding all of these children is the parent container, the same as Flexbox. So when we design grid, we have to decide on who is the parent container, and then all of the grid children or the direct subordinates will be what will be designed with the grid. Okay, so looking at the CSS that I have an empty container right now, a class container. I've done very simple design on the child and the even and odd numbers just so that we can see a difference of stuff as we're making some changes. So let's start laying this out to get grid. Really, all you need to do is add display grid, and you now have a grid, but a lot of stuff is defaulted. So we need to actually set stuff. So if you start typing grid template columns, you are now designing in a grid, and you can say how many columns. So if I said 100 pixels, now I have a 1-column grid that is going to be all of my children 1 through 10 are all sized as 100 pixels as the width. I could make another column. I could say 200 pixels, and now I have a 2-column grid where the first one is 100 pixels, the second one is 200 pixels. I could, also use, say, percentages because I want to try to make mine responsive. The problem is that when I do that, now this is taking up 80% of the screen. This is 100 pixels. This is 20%, 200 pixels. This 80% is the size width of the parent container. So if I start dragging this down, I'm going to start having problems because actually that 80% plus those 300 pixels is going to end up being too big. So I'm going to start having sizing issues. This is where Grid has designed a new unit to use instead of doing percent so that we can still have responsive, but it will do the calculations for us. If we considered that we have our container is taking a width of 1,000 pixels, and let's say it's a 2-column grid, and I am subtracting off 100 pixels, I have a 900 pixels left over. Okay, so I could say I want another column of 900 pixels, but again, that is not responsive. If I do this, it is not responsive. If I'm sizing this down, now I have to scroll over because it's still sizing those as exact. But what I can do is I can say, you know what, whatever's left over, I want it applied to this column. And so I use something that's called a fractional unit. Now, fractional units do require a couple things. I have to set my width and height of my container so that it can do the calculations accurately. So I say width, and I like to use vertical width, vertical height, because that is what I'm using to determine my sizing based off of the screen size. So I'm going to say that I want my width to be 100 vertical width, and my columns are going to scale. Now I can have 1 FR, that stands for 1 fractional unit. I could also do 2 fractional units, I have a 3-column. Now if you notice, this column right here, this middle column, is half as big as the last column on the outside right. Because it's 1FR and 2FR. Now, if I size, I mean, you know what is happening. That middle column is sizing, it's growing slower than that 2FR column, my last column. Or you could say that the last column is growing faster or at a higher rate. In fact, it's growing twice as fast. Okay? Now the calculations are all done automatically. Whatever the pixel width of this is, basically I'm taking whatever that pixel width converts to, I'm subtracting 100 from it, and then the remainder is broken up into 3 fractional units. One fractional unit is broken up into the middle column, and 2 fractional units is broken up to the outside right column. So if I use my example of 1,000 pixels minus 100 pixels, that leaves 900 pixels. Then 900 divided by 3 fractional units would be 300 pixels apiece. So this middle one would be 300 pixels, and this outside right one would be 600 pixels. Okay, so I can use this to design any number of columns that I want. If I want to go ahead and start designing the rows, then I need to set my height. Now I could say 100 virtual height, and now I am considering the size of the screen that I have. If I wanted to make my page so it's actually scrollable, not really worrying about the content and I want stuff to space out, then any multiple of 200 would be an additional screen height. So if I did 200 virtual height, then I should end up having to scroll my screen to see 2 full screen heights. So there's 1, there's 2. Now grid will automatically, once we reach the end, and unless you set it differently, is going to start in the left, work its way, fill out the full column, and then create another row and start filling that out. But I can start designating stuff by typing grid template rows and excuse me, designate my sizing for my rows. So I could have one that set as the hard size of, say, 100 pixels, and I could have one that is a combination of 1FR. I could still, use one that's a combination of, say, a percentage. As long as I have at least one of those as a fractional unit, then the calculations, for the most part, will work very hard at trying to keep stuff in bounds. If I shrink this down, what we'll notice is that that middle column will start getting small to try to maintain the fitting of this. So if I drag way down, my middle column is now taking up a lot less space, but it's working real hard for 7, 8, and 9, that last column, to maintain that space. Now again, like I said, you have to actually tell on if you want it to, when it's automatically creating a row, how big that row is going to be. Okay, so if we are looking at this and we want to try to design some type of layout, just using that, let's look at a web page and how we could try to mimic the layout of it. So if I look, say, at this page, waltercruz.mystrikingly.com, and we're looking at just this first page, what I'm noticing is that he's got, really, this is one element. He's got maybe, an H2 tag, some type of heading, and then he's got some paragraph information. It's very simple, but he's probably designing this something similar with the grid. If he was doing that, he would probably want this to be all a direct child and not individually. So this is where you'd want to use a non-semantic element like a div. A div is non-semantic, so it's not going to mess up our normal flow with our semantic elements, but we can use that to contain that heading and that paragraph, and then we could look at how we could design that. So I'm going to use a Chrome extension and kind of draw out some grid lines so we can try to kind of see what we're looking at if we were to design this with a grid. So if I'm looking, I have a grid now that is 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, and 3 rows, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now this is in the middle of it. So if I was using my divs, we're going to get to that, but let's get some measurements first. So here, if I'm measuring from this line, and I'm going to hold shift using this and drag over, I have 395 pixels. Now, I'm going to have to come up with some sizes for these columns, but if I think about it, do I really care about what the actual width of this is here and what the width of this is here? If I look at this, it looks like it's centered to me. That means that whatever that width is, if I subtract 395 pixels, I need a column that is taking half of what's left and another column that's taking half of what's left. So if I go to my grid template columns, I want 1 fractional unit, 395 pixels, and 1 fractional unit. Okay, that fractional unit is, it doesn't matter what that width is. I'm just going to take that calculation and subtract 395, and whatever remains I'm putting here and here and splitting it. Okay, let's go back and look at the top. We want to measure this. So let's say we got 220 pixels. Again, this looks like it's centered, so whatever's left, half of it needs to go here and half of it needs to go here. So I can look here, I was 295 pixels. So we can go here and we can say, all right, well, I want 1 FR, 295 pixels, and 1 FR. Okay, now we have a layout, but I have a little bit of a sizing issue. I'm looking at a page, just this. This is not, his page is scrollable, but what I'm looking at right now is not the scrollable thing. So if I'm just designing for this page, this is taking up 100% of the virtual height. So let's go ahead and change our 200 VH to 100 VH. And now we actually have a page that's looking a lot more like what is in the actual example that we see. 220 pixels and 395. Excuse me, 220. Okay. But then I do still see this element down here. So let's look at just commenting out this div right here. So Control/. And now we have a page that's going to have that number 5 right there automatically center in our page. So as I'm sizing, this is automatically centering up and down, left and right, which is good. So in my CSS, let's go ahead and continue trying to design. Let's comment out the coloring for the backgrounds. Let's go to number 5. I'm just going to take off that 5. And let's start putting some design in there. So I'm going to do H2. And let's say I do red beard. Close off my tag. Paragraph. Programmer. I'm going to use pipes. Web designer. Father. Whatever you want to put. Okay. Make sure I close off my tags. What I'm seeing right now is this is actually taking more space than what it is for the text. Part of that is because I'm setting a hard font size for all of my elements that are a child. So if I comment out font size, now I have stuff fitting. I'm still not seeing that image, so let's go ahead and add that image. If we're looking at the picture, this image is not contained by a child element. What it looks like is it is a part of the parent. So this looks like this could be a background picture. So if we go here in CodePen, we could click assets just to throw an image in. And we're going to go to photos. I want some type of face photo. So let's just go ahead and search face, try to get something. How about this one? I'm just going to click, copy it, and then I'm going to use for my parent. This is where I'm going to be putting my background photo. So I'm going to type background image, URL, parentheses, put some quotes in, paste. And this should start looking like it. However, the picture looks like it's only looking at some of it. It's because we have to set the size. So we can say background size, and we're just going to type cover. Okay, now I have something that is resembling this design. However, let's look really at what he has. He has one element. How many did we use? We used 9. So let's go ahead and try to design this then, only using one element. Now there are multiple ways to do this, but I think that this is one of the easiest ways. So I'm going to comment out all of these other div containers, and so we just have one. Okay, now we can do a couple different things. One of the easiest ways to do this is to design the layout, and I can actually choose in grid because the order of where they appear in HTML really does not matter in terms of grid. I can say grid template areas, and I can start designating where everything should go. And since I just have one child element, I can designate exactly where I want that to go, which is in the middle of the page. So grid template areas, I like to hit enter so that it's on its own line. Now I'm just going to add double quotes for each row that I have. So since I have 3 rows, one set of double quotes. Go to the next line, another set of double quotes, go to the next line, another set of double quotes, okay? 3 rows, 3 sets of double quotes. Finish it off with the semicolon so our code's not broken. And then when I'm using this grid template areas, doing it this way, we kind of get like a little mini mock-up of what we want our design to look like, and it's easy to see what you want to happen. If you want a cell to be empty, then you need to use the period key. So I have 3 columns, so I'm going to put 3 periods and separate them with space. Period, 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 because there's nothing on my top row based off of his example. There's nothing on my bottom row based off his example. So let's go ahead and fill that one out. Period, period, period. And then in the middle, we need to start using a name of what we want to attach. So this right here, I need to have a name attached to that. I already know that there's nothing on the left or right, so I'm going to put a period, and the name, I'm just going to go ahead and call it child. And then I put another period. Now, I don't see anything happening, but we have a little mini mock-up right now. We need to tell the browser that this child is actually that div tag that has my wording in it. Well, I could use div. I'm going to go ahead and use this class child since I only have one. So in my child class, I'm just going to say grid area, and then I call it child, and bam, my text is now centered on that page, one element, just like what he's got. Okay, and this will be responsive because it's taking into account my screen width and my screen height. Okay, now we could use that grid area a lot more to our advantage, that we could designate specific things. So I'm going to go ahead and comment out div 1 through 4, or comment back in, and instead of saying this text, I'm just going to delete that off. I'm going to use this just for example to say, let's say I'm trying to design for a header, a main, an aside, another aside, and I'll say footer. Okay. Now I want all of these. I want to designate where they're going to be on a grid and give a layout. So let's say I'm going to do some type of 3-column layout. I want the header to go all the way across. I want the footer to go all the way across. Then I want like an aside, a main, and another aside. Okay, so now I have to start designating some stuff. When you're using grid areas, you need to be unique in the name that you use. So let's go ahead and delete off that grid area. Now, I still have a grid, but I have to say specifically where those are going to go. So let's go ahead and we'll start defining those. So this div, the easiest way I would say is if you attach a class. So in this one, again, we would probably use semantic elements for a header, a main, and a side 2, which would also be an aside, and a footer. But I'm going to attach just so you can see it working with div tags. So I'm going to add a class for header, a class for main, a class for aside, a class for aside 2, and a class for footer. Okay, now that I have those, I can go ahead and start calling those classes. So main, grid, area, main. Dot header, grid, area, header. Dot aside, grid, area, aside. Make sure you're finishing all your stuff with semicolons. Dot aside 2, grid, area, aside 2. And dot footer, grid, area, footer. Okay, so now I could just do my layout here. So if I want my header to go all the way across 3 columns, I just write it 3 times. Header, header, header. Now, header is going all the way across. On my middle, I want, let's say, aside, then the main, and then aside 2. And then on my bottom, I want footer going across. Footer, footer, footer. There we go. There is a responsive page layout. I wanted to adjust my height so I have more room for the middle row. Maybe I'm actually going to set a harder size. So my columns, maybe that fractional unit is not going to be in the middle. Maybe I'm having, let's say, 100 pixels designated for each of those asides, 1 FR and 100 pixels. And then my header and my footer are going to have specific sizes, maybe 80 pixels, 1 FR, 80 pixels. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and comment out this image, and we can bring our child even odd designs back. And see what we got. Okay, so headers spanning across, aside's only taking up 100 pixels. Aside 2 is only taking up 100 pixels. Main is taking up the remainder. Again, if I don't like how much space I gave them, I can designate more. Maybe that aside 2 is going to have 300. And main's going to have whatever's left over, and then I scroll down and I can have my footer all the way across. Okay, so it's a quick kind of implementation of using grid areas to designate exactly what we want to do for layout. And again, the order does not matter. I use div tags. In this next video, I'm going to use semantics, and we're going to go through how maybe we can do the layout for this page, at least quick down and dirty, to look at designing this using semantics elements and building this out. Okay, all right, good luck, have fun.